Russia's Black Dolphin prison houses some of the country's toughest, most violent criminals.
From the Butyrka Prison, where overcrowding and starvation are common, to the remote island prison of Pyatak, where prisoners never leave alive, Russia's most brutal prisons are infamous for their harsh conditions. These places are designed to break a person, both physically and mentally. But perhaps the worst is Russia's Owl Prison, where prisoners expect to die at -50 degrees Celsius. Russia's Polar Owl and Polar Wolf prisons. Far to the north, deep in Russia's Ural Mountains, there is a place that feels more like a frozen wasteland than anything else. It's not just the biting cold or the endless stretches of snow. No, it's something much darker. Tucked away in the remote settlement of Karp, 1,200 miles northeast of Moscow, you will find two of the most feared prisons in Russia. Here, time seems to freeze, along with the prisoners locked inside, leaving only dread and despair. The town of Karp wasn't always known for housing criminals.
Assassins, mafia bosses, serial killers.
Back in 1961, it began as a labor camp where prisoners were forced to build a railway. Today, the town's main claim to fame are its two notorious penal colonies, IK-18, or the Polar Owl, and IK-3, known as the Polar Wolf. Both names may sound almost mythical, but the reality is far grimmer. These prisons aren't just for regular criminals. They are reserved for Russia's worst offenders and those who oppose the government. The first, Polar Owl, is a supermax prison. It's one of 7 labor colonies in Russia meant for convicts serving life sentences. It's located near the Sob River, surrounded by towering mountains, but there is nothing peaceful about it. The harsh landscape hides a climate that is nothing short of brutal. Half the year, temperatures stay around 40 degrees below zero. Winter starts early in autumn and doesn't release its icy grip until summer is nearly over. When it's not freezing cold, the rain and wind beat down on the prisoners. Even the nights feel like they last forever. Polar nights where the sun doesn't rise for days on end. Polar Owl became a prison for life sentence convicts in 2004. Inside its walls are men who have committed some of the most horrific crimes. Life there isn't just harsh because of the weather. Prisoners spend nearly every moment locked in their cells. Each cell has a bed, but they can't sit or lie on it until 10 p.m. every night. Most of the time, they are alone, with no one to talk to and no human connection. A single yearly visit from a family member is the only glimpse of the outside world they're allowed. One prisoner, when describing the experience, said it felt like the prison was built with one goal: to break the human spirit. It's easy to believe that's true. Inmates aren't even allowed to speak with each other. The silence is deafening, stretching on for years, possibly forever. No one has ever managed to escape from Polar Owl.
This is what's known as Russia's Polar Wolf Prison and is the new home of jailed opposition politician.
One man tried back in 2011, but he didn't get far. Before the guards caught him, a pack of 20 Caucasian shepherd dogs almost tore him apart. It's clear there's no running from this place, but if you think Polar Owl is as bad as it gets, think again. The second prison in Karp, Polar Wolf, might be even worse. This prison made international headlines in 2023 when Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, was sent there. His crime? Officially, embezzlement and extremism, but many believed his charges were a politically motivated punishment. Navalny didn't last long. 2 months after he arrived, he was dead.
Russian dissident Alexei Navalny, who was Vladimir Putin's top political opponent before his death.
The prisoners at Polar Wolf live in constant misery. The prison is freezing, with little to no heat to protect them from the icy temperatures. Some of the cells have tiny radiators on the floor, but others have nothing but a cruel joke. Radiators painted on the wall, offering no warmth. One former prisoner who survived Polar Wolf and was released in 2018, shared details that chilled to the bone. He remembered how the guards would punish them in the dead of winter. Prisoners were dragged outside, barely dressed for the weather, and forced to stand perfectly still for nearly an hour in temperatures that could drop to -45 degrees Celsius. The guards stood by, watching like hawks. If anyone dared move a muscle, the whole group would be soaked with ice-cold water. Springtime didn't offer much relief either. With the snow melting and the air warming up, the guards found new ways to torment the prisoners. They were left outside in swarms of mosquitoes and biting flies. The prisoners could feel the insects biting and crawling over their skin, but moving to swat them away meant another round with the water cannon. The system at Polar Wolf was built to crush any trace of resistance or hope. The guards ruled with absolute power, and obedience was the only way to survive. Trust was a dangerous thing too. Prisoners were often forced to become informants, reporting on each other to earn some favor from the guards. This broke any chance of solidarity between them. One prisoner said that unlike in other Russian prisons, where a sense of community could help people get through the darkest days, Polar Wolf made sure that didn't exist. You couldn't trust anyone. Many who left the prison weren't free. Not really. The trauma clung to them long after they had walked out the gates. Several former prisoners spoke about the mental scars they carried, wounds that time hadn't healed. Some were left battling with mental illness, struggling to find normalcy in a world that no longer made sense to them. For those still inside, there was no escape from the misery, the cold, the isolation, the constant fear. It all worked together to make sure no one left Polar Wolf the same as they entered. But while Polar Owl and Polar Wolf seem like prisons that no one could survive, let alone escape, there's one place even more infamous, another prison deeper in Russia's vast wilderness, with security so tight that no one has ever made it out. Pyatak Prison. Imagine being locked away in a tiny room for almost 23 hours a day, knowing you might never leave alive. That's what life is like for the inmates of Pyatak Prison, located on a remote island in the Vologda region of Russia. It sits between Moscow and the Arctic Circle, surrounded by forests and the cold, unforgiving waters of White Lake. Once you step inside this prison, it's likely you'll only leave in a body bag. Pyatak, sometimes called the Alcatraz of Russia, is where around 200 of the country's most dangerous criminals
housed 170 convicts, amongst the most violent criminals in the country,
are held. The prison, once an old Orthodox monastery, now has thick, white brick walls laced with sharp coils of barbed wire. For these prisoners, escape is not an option. Digging tunnels won't work because they would just hit water, and if anyone tries to swim, they would be shot by guards long before they could reach the shore. The guards aren't the only threat. Life in Pyatak is harsh, brutal even. Prisoners spend 22.5 hours each day locked in their small two-man cells. They are only allowed to leave their cells for 90 minutes, and that time is spent pacing back and forth in a cramped outdoor cage. With such little movement and sunlight, it's no wonder that the prison psychologist said people break down. The psychologist explained that after just a few years, prisoners start to lose who they are. Their personalities fade, their spirits crumble. According to the psychologist, no one can stay here for 25 years and still be the same. Some inmates survive by shutting themselves off emotionally. Others don't even try. There is no running water in their cells, no proper bathrooms or places to wash up. This lack of basic human needs leads to all kinds of sickness. In fact, about half of the inmates have tuberculosis. Yet it's the isolation that breaks them more than anything else. Imagine knowing you can only see 2 people from the outside world every year, just 2 visitors. That's all you get. No other contact with life beyond the prison walls. One prisoner, after a while, told his wife to leave him. He told her to get a divorce. That's how it goes here. The prison takes not just your freedom, but your connections, your life. as you once knew it. And if you think it can't get worse, think again. If prisoners step out of line, their punishment is beyond cruel. For 15 days, they are thrown into a tiny, dark room with only a metal bucket for company. There is nothing but a wooden perch to sit on. That's it. No light, no real comfort. Just a bucket, a perch, and their thoughts. You might think being locked up like that would protect them from the dangers of regular prisons. Violence, assault, abuse, and yes, maybe they are safe from that kind of physical harm, but the psychological torture of Pyatak is enough to tear anyone apart. The loneliness gnaws at them. The isolation crushes them. Some prisoners can't handle it and go mad. Others manage to hold it together, but never stop feeling the weight of it all. In a strange, desperate twist, some prisoners even hurt themselves on purpose. They will swallow things like teapot handles, spoons, and even nails. Why? Because it means they will be sent to the prison hospital. It's quieter there, maybe even peaceful compared to their cells. It's a way out, even if it's only temporary. The truth is, no one has ever escaped from Pyatak. There's nowhere to run. The prison is in the middle of a freezing lake, surrounded by harsh waters and well-armed guards. Even the most determined escape artists would fail. For most of the prisoners, there's no hope, no future outside the prison. They live knowing that they will likely die there, and if no one claims their bodies, they will be buried in a small village graveyard nearby. Instead of a name, their graves will be marked with just a serial number. But if you think Pyatak is the worst it can get, you haven't heard about the next prison on the list. It's one that will make Pyatak look like a walk in the park. Black Dolphin Prison. In the Orenburg region of Russia lies one of the most feared prisons in the country. Every Russian criminal knows it, and they all share a common dread. Here, human rights are barely a consideration, especially behind these particular prison walls. This place is called Black Dolphin Prison. It is a fortress designed to hold the worst of the worst, a place where the thought of freedom is nothing more than a distant dream. Black Dolphin Prison gets its name from a statue out front, shaped like Black Dolphin. The odd part, this statue wasn't sculpted by some famous artist, but by the prisoners themselves. It is a strange symbol for a place that houses serial killers, cannibals, terrorists, and other violent criminals. The prison is one of the oldest in Russia, but it has evolved into a high-security nightmare. You see, escaping Black Dolphin is not an option. No one has ever managed to break free, and the prison makes sure it stays that way. The prison's 700 inmates have together killed around 3,500 people. That is an average of 5 murders per prisoner. If you want to understand the level of evil inside this prison, just look at Vladimir Nikolaev. He is one of Russia's most notorious murderers. Nikolaev killed a man during a drunken fight, dragged the body into his bathroom, and chopped it up. Following this, he ate part of the body. As if that wasn't horrific enough, he gave some of the meat to a friend whose wife unknowingly cooked it and served it to her family, thinking it was kangaroo meat. In Black Dolphin, life is bleak. Inmates are imprisoned for life with no hope of release. They spend their days in cells set back behind 3 layers of steel doors. Each cell is a cell within a cell, with 2 prisoners crammed into a 50-square-foot space. There is no lounging around in Black Dolphin. From the moment they wake up until it's time for bed, prisoners are forced to stand. They aren't allowed to sit or rest on their bunks, 16 hours straight on their feet. But it's not just the standing. The guards make rounds every 15 minutes to keep the prisoners under constant surveillance. If the inmates need to leave their cells, they don't walk upright like normal people. No, they have to bend at the waist, their eyes glued to the floor. This strange rule isn't just to make them uncomfortable. It's a tactic. By keeping their heads down, the prisoners can't see where they're going or make note of their surroundings. This way, the guards maintain complete control, and the prisoners have no chance to plan an escape. Every step in this prison is planned to prevent inmates from figuring out its layout. When they arrive at Black Dolphin, they are blindfolded, disoriented, and utterly lost, and it stays that way. Whenever prisoners are moved between buildings, the blindfolds go back on, so they never get a clear view of their environment. There is no prison yard here either, so exercise doesn't happen outdoors. Instead, the inmates pace back and forth in another small cell. That's their only freedom, if you can even call it that. And while they stretch their legs, guards search their cells for anything out of the ordinary, making sure the prisoners don't have anything they shouldn't. Now, if you think the conditions could at least be somewhat bearable, think again. There is no cafeteria in Black Dolphin. The prisoners eat all their meals in their cells, soup and bread, 4 times a day. It's not much, but it's all they get. The only things they are allowed for entertainment are books, newspapers, and a radio. No television, no phone calls, no human connection. Just the cold walls of their cells and the occasional voice over the radio. There is one thing all inmates here know. Once you are in Black Dolphin, you don't leave. The only way out of this place is in a coffin. It's a life sentence in every sense of the word. The combination of isolation, constant surveillance, and the bleakness of daily life wears on the prisoners' minds. But it's designed that way. Black Dolphin isn't meant to just imprison criminals. It's meant to break them. But if you think Black Dolphin is bad, you haven't heard about Butyrka Prison. If you thought things couldn't get worse, just wait. Now, it's time for today's subscriber's pick. The image we are looking at today shows the grim sight of tiger cages in Vietnam. It was a notorious symbol of cruelty during the Vietnam War. These barbed wire cages confined prisoners in tiny, suffocating spaces where they were subjected to extreme torture. The cages were so small that prisoners couldn't even sit up straight, forcing them to stay in awkward, painful positions for days or weeks. The bars on the ceilings allowed guards to beat the prisoners with sticks or throw quicklime on them, which would burn their skin and even blind them. The scorching sun and limited food and water made survival a near impossible task for many. Russia's Owl Prison, prisoners expect to die at -50 degrees Celsius. May seem like a completely different horror, but both systems reflect the darkest aspects of human cruelty. Be it freezing to death in Russia or enduring unbearable heat in Vietnam, these prisons highlight the lengths to which regimes go to break their prisoners. What would you do if you were trapped in such a cage? Could you withstand such cruelty and still maintain hope? Butyrka Prison. This next prison has a reputation so dark, it's hard to believe such a place still exists. Located in Moscow, Butyrka Prison has been around for over 250 years, and in all that time, it has been a symbol of suffering. People have heard about the terrible conditions inside, the human rights violations, and the daring escapes. But what goes on behind those cold, crumbling walls is worse than most could imagine. Today, overcrowding in Butyrka is at a dangerous level. Cells designed to hold 10 people are crammed with over 100 inmates. There is barely room to breathe. In some places, the roof leaks, and the mold covering the walls and ceilings is so thick. The situation is especially hard on prisoners with diseases. Many have tuberculosis or AIDS. Inmates who are sick are thrown together with no real effort to stop the spread of these illnesses. To make matters worse, drug users share one needle between them, creating a breeding ground for disease. Getting from the prison to the court is no better. The police vans that transport the inmates are overcrowded, putting healthy prisoners right next to those with contagious diseases. The conditions inside the prison vans are just as terrible as the cells. It's a wonder how anyone manages to stay alive long enough to make it to trial. Inside Butyrka, basic human necessities are scarce. There is only cold tap water, and showers are a once-a-week luxury. Anything beyond that, like food, a television, or even a fridge, comes from the inmates themselves, or their families. If they are lucky enough to get a care package, it might arrive a day late. It's clear that the prison system doesn't prioritize the well-being of those locked inside. Instead, inmates are left to survive on their own, with little support from the authorities. Communication with the outside world is nearly impossible for prisoners, but for those who can afford it, mobile phones are a lifeline. However, they come at a high price. Phones inside the prison are so rare and fragile that they are referred to as crystalware. Getting one costs a lot, and keeping it hidden is even harder. The guards conduct searches regularly, and it's easy to lose a phone if it's discovered. Some guards don't even bother to report finding a phone. They would rather just pocket it for themselves. Escape attempts used to be a more common occurrence, but these days they are almost impossible. The last successful escape happened in 2010, when a Belarusian man named Vitaly managed to break free from the prison's mental ward. He overpowered a guard, leaped over the fence and barbed wire, and disappeared. The media was fascinated by his story, calling his escape fantastic and supernatural. Prison guards were left scratching their heads, wondering how he scaled a 5-meter wall in seconds. Vitaly's freedom didn't last long. He was caught 2 years later in Finland and brought back to Butyrka. Since then, security has tightened even more. Over 400 cameras now monitor every corner of the prison, making escape attempts a thing of the past. Despite the high-tech surveillance and strict security, life inside Butyrka remains brutal. The prisoners here are awaiting trial, not yet convicted of any crime, but they are treated like they have already been sentenced to death. The guards have little sympathy. It's not uncommon to hear of inmates taking their own lives or being found dead under suspicious circumstances. There are whispers of torture, and marks of violence are often found on the bodies of the dead. Speaking of torture, this next prison was specifically designed to break prisoners down mentally. Lefortovo Prison. Lefortovo Prison, located on the outskirts of Moscow, has long been a symbol of fear and control in Russia. Built in the late 1800s, it was originally designed under Tsarist rule,
cradled inside the city of Moscow itself and tucked away into an unassuming small 4-story building,
and later became notorious for its role during Soviet times. Lefortovo isn't just a prison. It's a place meant to break a person, especially those who dare to challenge the Russian government. The yellow-walled building, shaped like the letter K, feels like a trap from the moment you enter. Every former inmate describes it as a place built to make you feel isolated and forgotten. The prison's corridors are covered with worn-out carpets that muffle any sound. There's a chilling quietness. It's like the prison itself is trying to erase any trace of life. Even though Lefortovo is technically a pre-trial detention center, prisoners can spend years locked up there, waiting for their cases to move forward. Some never leave. In the early 2000s, Lefortovo was transferred from the Federal Security Service to the Justice Ministry. This shift came after a requirement from the Council of Europe, which wanted to separate investigative bodies from the running of prisons. Yet, despite the change in oversight, Lefortovo's reputation for harsh treatment remained. Life inside Lefortovo is all about control. Prisoners are allowed to take short walks in small, enclosed yards surrounded by high walls. The walks are brief, just an hour, and even then, the prisoners can't hear each other. A central radio system blasts music throughout the compound to ensure absolute isolation. There's no talking, no sharing of thoughts, no human connection, just walls and noise. After spending 10 days in quarantine, new prisoners are moved to cells where they either stay alone or share the space with 1 or 2 others. The cells themselves are tiny, about 85 square feet, just big enough for a bed, a small table, and a chair. There is a barred window, but it hardly lets in any natural light. The window can be opened slightly with a lever, allowing a glimpse of the sky, but even that feels like a tease. Just enough to remind you of the world outside, but not enough to feel free. The toilet in each cell offers little privacy, separated from the bed by only a half wall. There's a sink, a refrigerator, and a small cabinet from the prison store or care packages from family members. The TV, which only plays state-run channels, is a constant reminder of the propaganda fed to the inmates day and night. Every few minutes, a guard peers into the cell through a circular window on the door, ensuring the prisoner remains under constant watch. Showers are a rare luxury, permitted just once a week. The prison's entire structure, from the guard's behavior to the rigid routines, is designed to crush any sense of individuality. Former prisoners say it's made clear from the moment you arrive. You are no longer a person with rights. You are entirely at the mercy of the system. The interrogations at Lefortovo are marked by the clanging of metal. Guards signal each other by banging their keys together, a way of announcing that a prisoner is being moved to an interrogation room. It's a sound that echoes through the hallways, warning other prisoners and staff to clear the area. No one is allowed to witness the prisoners' movements. Guards snap their fingers as they walk down the corridors, another signal to keep others out of sight. Russian journalist Ivan Safronov, who spent over 2 years in Lefortovo, once said that the moment you arrive there, you stop being a person with rights. Inmates like Safronov described the prison as a frozen place, a world where isolation becomes your reality. It's not just the physical isolation, the lack of contact with other prisoners or the outside world, but the psychological isolation. The system's goal is clear: to make you submit completely. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.